to stay here and listen.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everyone. Happy Erev Shavuot.
Have a good day.
I'm very excited that we are able to do this right before the holiday. Being that tomorrow is Shavuot, we are not going to have a Torah class, and it is truly that we were able to do the Torah class right before Shavuot and to welcome Shavuot with the proper atmosphere and with the proper excitement and with the proper preparation, because everything that we experience in life is only as good as what we invest in it. And that is true for Shabbat, and that is true for holidays, and that is true for all the important days of the year, and that is true for all the experiences of our lives. When we invest in something, it has more meaning to us, it gives back to us a much greater effect. So it is an appropriate time, and I think it's a blessing that we can get together today. I'm sure people are busy getting ready for the holiday, whether it is cooking or shopping or whatever we need to do to make it a meaningful one for ourselves or for our families. It is beautiful to see everyone this morning. And I hope that the class today that we're going to have is going to be a source of inspiration as well as information that you can carry into the holiday and bring more meaning into this very spiritual set of days that we have called Shavuot. Before we begin, I just want to dedicate this class to the beloved righteous memory of the father of Yvonne Kramer, Yosef ben Alexander. And Yvonne, you made a beautiful donation in your father's memory, and I would like to dedicate the merit of the learning that we have in this class today to his honor and to your honor as well, because there's a concept that we know, that we say that Mazar b'chaim afu b'chaim, as his children live, so he too shall live. And the idea is that in as much as people who are no longer in the world of action, is what we call this world, the world of action, olam ha'asiyah, the world that we live in is called the world of action. There are other worlds that the soul inhabits, but the body only inhabits the world of action. And in as much as once a person leaves the world of action, they're no longer able to do good deeds. Those who are beloved to that person, whether children or beloved friends who do something on their behalf, bring merit to their soul, and in a certain way continue their existence on this earth. Because if someone is doing something for you, in honor of you, because of you, that means that they're still alive on a certain sense. So may the neshama of your father, Yosef ben Alexander, have comfort, be blessed, and may he derive much nachas from the class that we're going to have today in his honor. And it's what an auspicious class it is to have, because we learn Torah every week. We learn the Parshat HaShavua. So every week we get into the Torah and we try to understand it, and we try to be inspired by it, and we try to see how it can be relevant to our lives. But today is the day of Shavuot, tonight. And what we're doing today is we're really celebrating everything that we do all year round. So I could not think of a better time to honor someone than to do it on a day that we celebrate the giving of the Torah, which is Shavuot. Now, today what I would like to do is two parts. One is to give some practical tips about Shavuot, a refresher course of the little customs that we have and the mitzvot that we have of Shavuot, and then to go into the meaning of Shavuot, the purpose of Shavuot, the relevance to our lives and the lessons that we learned today. We really need to have both, because in order to make Shavuot happen, we tap into all these customs, and these customs give us the material, it's the bricks that make our Shavuot possible. So first of all, let's go into the name of Shavuot. What does Shavuot mean? Shavuot literally means weeks. That's what it means. It's a very important holiday, but it means weeks. And what is it? And week, I mean like the week of the year, the days of the week. Shavuot, like in Hebrew, Shavuot is. So Shavuot is weeks, essentially. What are we really celebrating? We're celebrating that we concluded 7 weeks from Pesach until now. We are now exactly 7 weeks from Pesach, from the second night of Pesach until Shavuot. We count the Omer. The Omer is 7 weeks long, 7 times 7, 7 times 7 days, 49 days. Last night we counted the 49th day, and tonight we're going into day 50. So we really have Sheva Shavuot. The word Shavuah, if you look at the etymology, it has Shin Vev Ayin, which means 7, because a week is 7 days. So what we essentially have with Shavuot is the culmination of 7 days of 7. And in that way, Shavuot is a very unique holiday. It's a very unique holiday and different than all the other holidays. All other holidays stand on their own merit. We're told, let's say, for example, that Yom Kippur is on the 10th day of the 7th month, which is Tishrei. We're told that Rosh Hashanah is on the 1st day of the 7th month, which is Tishrei. We're told that Pesach is on the 14th day of Nisan in the evening, which is the 1st month. When it comes to Shavuot, we're not told the dates. We're told 7 weeks from Pesach, which makes it a very fascinating type of holiday. Whereas in most holidays, we can begin the holiday a little earlier. We know that Shabbat, let's say, now the candle lighting is getting longer. Shabbat is, tonight, candle lighting is 8:01. And for many people, to take Shabbat in at 8:01 means that they're going to go to synagogue late, and then they're going to pray late, and they're going to come home, they're going to have dinner at 10 o'clock. It's late. So what they do is they take Shabbat in earlier. They say, you know what? I'm going to welcome Shabbat a little earlier, and we're allowed to do that. And that is true for the other holidays. We're allowed to start the holiday a few hours earlier. There's a halachic time slot that this is permitted. I'm not going to go into that now. It's actually a mathematical calculation of when you're allowed to begin the holiday a few hours before the actual holiday. But the exception to this is the holiday of Shavuot. The holiday of Shavuot cannot began earlier than the time. So for example, today, look at my calendar here. Today, candle lighting is at 8:01, and my rib is around 9:14 or so. That means that the Shavuot, while we light candles at 8:01, Shavuot, in terms of the prayers that we make and in terms of the celebration of Shavuot, it cannot begin before 9:15 or so. I don't have the exact halachic time, 9:14, 9:13, something in that realm. And so we're talking about the only holiday where we cannot begin a little earlier. Now, why is that? You would think Shavuot is a beautiful holiday. It falls in this late spring, early summer, so the days are longer. Why can't we take it in a little earlier? And the answer is very simple. Shavuot is predicated, the timing of Shavuot is predicated not on its own date, but the 7 weeks that have to be concluded before Shavuot begins. So because we count 49th day and only on the 50th, it is Shavuot, therefore we have to wait. It's the only holiday, exceptionally, where we have to wait till nightfall to begin the holiday. And it's interesting that if somebody is traveling during Sefirah to Omer, this messes up their counting. And so our sages advise that not to cross international date lines if possible during Sefirah Omer, because then the question is, when do you start keeping Shavuot? Shavuot has to be 7 full weeks. So in that way, Shavuot is very different. Now, Shavuot celebrates then the giving of the Torah that happened exactly 50 days, 7 weeks after the Jewish people left Egypt. The Torah tells us that on the 3rd day of the month, the Jewish people gathered around the mountain to get prepared to receive the Torah. So the third month in biblical terms is the month of Sivan, and Rosh Chodesh Sivan was just on last week on Wednesday. So we're now on the 5th day of Sivan, and tonight is the 6th. So on the third day of the third month, they had 3 days of preparations, and then they got the Torah. What's fascinating about Shavuot this year, for anyone who loves numerology, is this. We are in the Jewish year 5781. The Torah was given to the Jewish people in the Jewish year of 2448. This means that this year we are celebrating the 3,333rd anniversary of the giving of the Torah. Okay, 3,333. So obviously, when you have a number that is so unique, it's a unique number in history, 3,333. What stands out in terms of this year's Shavuot is the number 3, 3333. So what is the symbolism of 3, and how does it relate to Shavuot, and how does it relate to Shavuot this year? So in general, the Medrash says about the Torah, and this is before this year, so the Medrash is circa the time of the Talmud. So the Medrash says about the giving of the Torah, that the giving of the Torah was given in the third month. The beginning of the giving started on the third day, and it was given to a people that are made of 3 components. And it was given to through a person who was also a third, and third in his family. So we have the third month of the third day of the third month, that 3 days of preparation, a nation that is comprised of 3, Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, given by a person who was the third in his family. And this is a medrash. That number 3 is very strongly associated with the concept of giving of the Torah to a people that have a book that is comprised of 3 sections: the Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. The Torah, the prophets, and the writings, which is the main you could call the main Bible, for lack of a better word. And so we have all these 3s: the Tanakh, the people that are a triple people, a man who was the third in his family on the third day of the third month. And this year, we are 33 years from 2448. So that the number 3 becomes very symbolic. We cannot ignore it. It's interesting that in general, Shavuot is associated with the number 3. But this year, we cannot ignore the fact that Shavuot is really the overarching theme of our Shavuot this year, of everyone in this life, this lifetime right now, that it's 3,333 years since the giving of the Torah. And the number 3 is a very interesting number in Judaism. In Gematria and in Jewish teachings, what does 3 represent? 3 is a breakdown of it is a coming together of 1 and 1 and 1 and 2, right? So it's 1 plus 2 is 3. And the in Jewish teaching, the number 1 is associated with the concept of unity, also singularity, because within 1 there is no duality, right? 1 is 1. So it's a beautiful number because it represents wholeness. So we say that God is 1 and his name is 1. So it's a beautiful number of unity. And we say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. God is 1. But within 1, there is no diversity because it's only one. Then you have the number 2. Number 2 is two ideas, but two ideas that could be in conflict with one another. So there could be duality. Two is two. When the Kabbalists speak of it, they talk about two perpendicular lines. In other words, two lines that do not meet with each other. Meaning there are two perspectives. So in that you would have the idea of, let's say, chesed or gevurah, meaning kindness and compassion. There's two approaches in life. A person can say, give the person a break. You can say, hold the person responsible. So we have duality. 2 represents duality. 3 in Kabbalah and in Jewish mysticism, in the Gematria, 3 represents unity. Why? Because if you have 2 different ideas, if the third idea can come and create a synergy between the third. So you have, let's say, thesis, antithesis, and synergy, right? And you have the coming together. So there is an idea that we're told, even when the rabbis deduct teachings from the Torah, and they want to deduct halacha, they want to deduct Jewish law, they talk about that there are 2 verses that come and they are in conflict with each other. For example, you could see something that says in one part of Torah X, Y, and Z, and then you'll see another thing that seems to conflict with the previous verse, and you say, which one is right? Is it this way or is it this way? And there comes the teaching until the third verse comes and makes, so to speak, a synergy between all of them, so that there's a truth in one, there's a truth in the other. The 2 alone are dualities that are in conflict with each other, and comes the third and creates synergy. So 3 is considered to be a synergetic number, a number that represents unity, but also allows for diversity. Whereas the number 1 represents unity, it's a unity without any other opinions. It's singular. So it's nice, but it doesn't make room for others. But 2 is great, but you can have 2 sides. And God knows 2 sides. Look at the world today. 2 sides is very difficult to deal with. But when you have 3, you have a synergy between right and left. You have center. In Kabbalah, we would call this tiferet. Tiferet is considered to be beautiful. So for example, if you talk about musical notes, right? You can have when you have 2 musical notes that are competing against each other, you can't hear either one. If you have only one, it's nice, but it's alone. But what happens when you have 2 and they meld together? Then you create a third sound, right? So you have the one sound, the other sound, and then if they work together in unison, what you create is actually a new sound, which includes harmony and includes the song with the harmony, and then you have a new sound. And this new sound is beautiful to the ears. Why? Because it's complex, it's rich. It's not the one singular voice of one instrument. It is a combination of 2 or more instruments, but they don't compete with each other. They complement each other. And what comes out is a new composition that is beautiful to the ears. And this is true. This is found in nature, where you have one color alone is beautiful. Another color is also beautiful, but sometimes 2 colors can be clashing with each other. But what happens when 2 colors are harmonizing with each other, and they're blending with each other, or they are complementing each other? Then you have a new concept, a new color scheme that is something much better than either one or the 2. It's a third idea. And so really 3 represents unity, but not a unity where my voice is muffled, not a unity where we're all together, but I'm not allowed to speak. It's a unity where your voice is heard, my voice is heard, and together we make new music. Yes, harmonious. And so 3 is a concept of unity, but diversity within unity, which is the most beautiful type of unity because it's the most sustainable type of unity. You know, in let's say in autocratic regimes, you'll have unity. You know, sometimes you'll see marches of like thousands or tens of thousands of people, and everyone is in lockstep. And there's something magnificent about it, but you know that there is only one opinion that is allowed to be expressed here, and another one is not allowed to come by. Sometimes you have 2 clashing opinions, but when you have diversity, and within diversity, there is harmony, that is the ultimate form of unity. And so this year, our Shavuot is the year 3333. And there's a concept in Torah that when something is true, it will be doubled. And if it's true again, it will be doubled twice. So what we have this year is a doubling and doubling and doubling. And so what's the message for us before we get into the actual celebration of Shavuot? Because I think it's something we can't miss. We live in such a fractured world. We live in such a world of discord. There is a level of tension that is endemic to almost every conversation. Go on social media, go to a supermarket, there's a tension where there's no room. There's no room for a diversity. It's an interesting thing because we would think that we live in the most diverse of times, but the truth is that there's an intolerance today if someone thinks differently. There's a way to think, and that's the only way. And it's hurtful. It's hurtful for us as human beings, and it's hurtful for us as a nation. Now, that doesn't mean we don't all have to think alike. You know, the Talmud says, "Ein pneihem shavas or ein partzufeihem shavas, ein doseim shavas." Just like you have 2 people have different faces, 2 fingerprints will have completely different patterns. 2 people will have different DNA. It's impossible that 2 people should think exactly alike. They have a different genetic makeup. They have different life experiences. They're going to be shaped by what happens to them. So we can't say, let's all think alike. That's not what unity is. That is a singular form of unity, but it doesn't allow for diversity. The true unity is when there's room for everyone at the table and there's respect, but there's a love that says, I want to make room for you. I want to hear your music. I want to be able to blend with you. So I think that just by the divine providence, the hashgacha pratis of this year, that this year we are facing 3,333 years since the giving of the Torah. I think the message is so clear that if there is one call to action that we all have to take really to heart, is that we have to invest in harmony within ourselves, first of all, our own selves. I once heard Rabbi Adin Steinzel say that that's the type of harmony that is the most difficult harmony to achieve. We can be pleasant with others, but within ourselves, within our own self, to have harmony with ourselves, have harmony within those who are close to us, our loved ones, those who we live with, those who we interact with, harmony with our people, and then there will be harmony in the world. I think that this is the greatest call of our time. We have to love harder. We have to give the benefit of the doubt. We have to embrace more. We have to put ourselves in another person's shoes. We have to be slower to judge, quicker to forgive. I think of all the messages that we have this Shavuot, this is something that will bring blessing to our world. And we know that when there is strife in the world, it is a sign that there's a lack of unity. And the Jewish people, we are such a small people, we can't really afford to be at each other's throats. We have to be united. When we're united, we give a good example for those around us. It's true when you have 2 friends that are not in conflict, it makes everyone else feel the conflict. So that's one of the, I think, vital messages that we must take to our heart this year. Now, Shavuot celebrates the giving of the Torah. And as I mentioned before, Shavuot is intrinsically connected to Mount Sinai. It's intrinsically connected to Passover. In other words, Shavuot if you think about a board game and the game ends or the game is over, it's It begins in Passover and it ends in Shavuot. Passover and Shavuot are two sides or two ends of one path. It begins with physical freedom. Of course, if we're physically suffering, if we're physically not able to move, if we're physically constrained, it affects us psychologically. And I'm sure all of you can relate to that. The long lockdown and the curfews, it does something to us, right? There's a physical pressure that we feel. There's a lack of joy in not being able to move, even if we're doing it for a higher purpose, right? So physical freedom is a prerequisite to the spiritual freedom. If you're not free, you can't pray to your God. You can't worship. You cannot be joyful. But physical freedom without spiritual freedom is a freedom that does not end in true freedom. And one of the great gifts that God gave us, and for this we should be forever grateful, is that when God released us from the bondage of Egypt, and we were a slave mentality state, God said, okay, I need to take you out of there. I need to get you out of the slave mentality. But right after you kind of get over this, so 7 weeks later, you need to know something. You need to have not only a why not, you have to have a why. You have to have a way to live. You have to have a path to live. You have to have a framework. And the framework is the 10 Commandments. I am God, your God. You shall have no other gods besides me. This seems to be an imposition. But if you look at it, the first two commandments of the 10 Commandments are the most liberating statements ever given to mankind. If there is a God who is the energy that creates heaven and earth, who is the energy that keeps the cosmos from crashing into each other, who keeps the world aloft, that is continuously creating the world. We're told that God creates the world every single day. He continuously creates the world. So we have this creator of the universe, the one that gives force to the universe. And he says, I am the force. Nothing should ever be worshipped besides me. That means that nobody, no pharaoh, no government, no addiction, no personality, no position, no experience that we find ourselves can become our dictator. There's only one God, and that's it. It is one of the most liberating statements ever given to mankind. God says, you are my people, you are my servants. My servants cannot be slaves. That's it. Because you're mine, you can't be a slave. So I mean, you're not allowed to be a slave to anything. Now, it doesn't mean that we still don't enslave ourselves. The world, look around, people are enslaved to fame and to fortune and to all types of things, unfortunately, that sometimes we are enslaved by it, and sometimes others enslave us in it. But the message of Matan Torah is, I took you out of Egypt. I took you out of Egypt so that you could be a people that live with a higher consciousness, and that the lower things of life do not control you. They are not your gods. They are not your masters. Nobody can be your master. Now, even if somebody is your master, because of a situation that you find yourself in, but they are not truly your master. And if you know that, you're a free man. One of the most moving memoirs I've ever read is Natan Sharansky, about his time in the prisons and in the Soviet gulags. And one of the things that stood out to me was that Sharansky survived psychologically by just understanding that he felt his Soviet guards were the greatest prisoners, even greater prisoners than he was. And that made him feel free. He had a book of Psalms. He wasn't a religious man at the time, but he found his book of Psalms, and this spoke to him, and this gave him the energy to go on. And he says a story, I may have shared this before, but it's such powerful story. He said a joke. He made an anti-Soviet regime joke when he was called in for questioning. And after he said the joke, he started to laugh. And the guards became very, very, very tense. And he said to them, why are you tense? He said, I know you want to laugh because it's a good joke, but you're afraid to laugh because you're going to get into trouble if you laugh. So he says, so who's really the free man? Me, who you're shackling up in a jail, or you who can't even laugh at a joke? So where does this come from? Where did he get it from? This idea that I am not, and I don't answer to a human being. I answer only to God. This was one of the greatest liberating statements that were made in all time. And of course, all the 10 commandments that follow it. The purpose of the Torah, the purpose of receiving the Torah was to give us this framework. And the Torah actually is one of the greatest, we talk about unity, besides liberty, the Torah is one of the greatest unifying elements of the Jewish people. It's interesting to note that on Shavuot, what do we read? What are the customs that we have on Shavuot? One of the great customs that we have on Shavuot is that we read the book of Ruth. Now, who was Ruth? Ruth was a Moabite woman who converted, so to speak, without using that term, she became part of the Jewish people. She married into a Jewish family, and the family, there was troubled times in Israel. The family left Israel because it was a difficult time, and all the menfolk of the family died. And her mother-in-law Naomi said to her, you know what? Look, girls, everyone died in the family. Go make a life for yourself. She said to Ruth and her sister, Orpah, go make a life for yourself. I'm going back to my people. And Ruth and Orpah wanted to go back with her. And she dissuaded them. She said, why would you come back with me? I'm a poor widow. I'm a nobody now. And you should stay here. Stay here. This is your people. You have community here. You have protection here. You'll be looked after. I'm now like a homeless woman. I have no family. My husband left Israel, so I'm kind of alone. You come back with me, you're just going to come back to poverty, and you're going to come back to an anonymity. You'll be a nobody. And she discouraged them very, very strongly. So they kept insisting. But at the end, Orpah said, you know what, you're right. Thank you for everything you've done for me. And she went back. But Ruth said no. Very famously, she said, your people are my people. Where you will go, I will go. And she followed Naomi back. And at the end, she ends up marrying an old tribesman of the tribe of Judah. And the marriage was very frowned upon because he was very, very old. And she was just one of his workers who were collecting the wheat at the time of the harvest. And from that night, one encounter, she became pregnant. She became pregnant with a child called Oved. He died the next day. Yes, he was a Gadol Hadar. He died the next day, and she was left pregnant. And there was a big question then, so who is she? What's her status? Because no one really knew who she was. But as we know, as history tells us, Oved had a son named Yishai. Yishai is the father of King David, and King David becomes not only the king of the Jewish people, but he becomes the ancestor and the father of all kings that are going to come from the Jewish people, all the great sages, all the great rabbis, and ultimately Mashiach himself. So the book of Ruth is read when? On Shavuot. King David was born and died on Shavuot, right? But what does this tell us? This tells us that what unites the Jewish people, what makes them a people, in fact, the great hope that we have on Shavuot is we talk about King David. King David is the ancestor of the Mashiach. So Shavuot is very much tied in with the Geula, with the redemption, with the times of blessing for the world. But what does it teach us? That who is the grandmother of King David, the great grandmother? It's Ruth. She was a Moabite. She wasn't genetically born Jewish. What determined her Jewishness? That the rabbis at the time said that even though there was a law in the Torah that said you may not marry someone from the children of Moab, they said this doesn't include a Moabite, and they allowed Ruth to come into the family. So their understanding of Torah is what allowed her in. So we see here that Torah and the heroine of Shavuot is a woman who comes into the Jewish people by virtue of wanting to be attached to God and the Jewish people. We look at our people today, and we see that throughout the years, for most of the years that we are a people, or a very big part of our life as a people, we were not in the land of Israel. Not only were we not in the land of Israel, we didn't all speak the same language. Not only do we all speak the same language, we have different customs, different cultures, and indeed Shavuot is celebrated somewhat differently in different cultures. But what unites all of us? What is the common denominator? It's Torah. So whether we have a land or we don't have a land, whether we are speaking French or English or Yiddish or Ladino or Arabic or name a language, what we have in common is Torah. Whether we are born Jewish from a Jewish mother, or we become Jewish by virtue of our wanting to be connected to the Jewish people, what do we have in common? The Torah. So the Torah is the most unifying factor in the Jewish people, even though there is debate in Torah. And the Torah is full of debate, the Talmud is full of debate, but it's a debate of number 3. It's not a debate of you're wrong, I'm right. It's I think this way, I think that way. And therefore, what's the culmination? The halacha will be a recognition of this and that, or the majority, or whatever it is. It is consensus, it's coming together. So Torah is the idea of unity of the Jewish people. Shavuot is the idea of unity. This year is the idea of unity. The whole concept of Torah is a concept of unity. In ancient times, there was a custom in the Ashkenazi communities that on Shavuot, they would take the Torah and they would put little honey on the Chumash, and they would take the little children, the ones who were just going into learning Torah. That was the time that they brought them in, not September 1st, not in the beginning of the school year, but on Shavuot, they put honey on their papers, and they would tell them to taste the honey and say that the Torah is sweet. So we see that the idea of sweetness and honey. And also there's a custom that we eat dairy foods on Shavuot, right? Why do we eat dairy foods on Shavuot? Some people say it's because the Torah is compared to milk and honey. The land of Israel is compared to milk and honey because honey is sweet, milk is fortifying. So we do have this custom of eating dairy. And what does this custom come from? The custom comes from as follows. There's several opinions given why we eat dairy. One is that, like I mentioned, that Torah is compared to milk. The other is because, simply put, the Jewish people were given the Torah, and when they were given the Torah, they were given the laws of Shechita, and because they were given the laws of Shechita and they were very complex, they couldn't at the time eat meat, so they ate dairy. Right? When you can't get meat, you eat dairy. So very practically speaking, they ate. Hold on a second. Very practically speaking, they ate dairy because they didn't know how to prepare the meat. But I saw another beautiful reason that why we eat dairy on Shavuot, a lesser known reason, and that is because it says that Moses, when he was put on the Nile to save his life, his mother put him on the Nile, and then the daughter of King Pharaoh found him, Batya. He wouldn't nurse from anybody. He wanted to nurse specifically with his nursemaids. he wanted to nurse specifically with his nursemaids. So this is something, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna just unplug this. Sorry, I apologize for that. Here we go. Gotta do what you gotta do. He wanted to nurse specifically from a Jewish nursemaid, and so they brought his mother, and it's so rabbis say that the giver of the Torah, Moses, was nursed. He only wanted a nurse from his mother, so we remember the milk.
Promise you to be early.
We remember the
Well,
milk Moses drank
I can't.
at the time. Remember the milk that Moses drank at the time, and so this is like a kind of a testament to the breast milk that he drank, and this is why we drink milk, which I thought is a very beautiful teaching. Another custom that we have is that we decorate the synagogue with flowers, and we decorate our home with flowers, and this is also several reasons are given for this. One is that it says that Mount Sinai, even though it was in the barren desert, when it came to receiving the Torah, suddenly flowers started to emerge from the mountain. And that's one reason that's given. And the other reason that's given is that it's almost as if God says about the Jewish people that this world is my garden, take care of it well. And the Torah is like the guidebook on how to tend God's garden. So that's another reason why we have flowers on Shavuot. Another custom that we have on Shavuot is that on the first night of Shavuot, we try to stay up as long as we can to study Torah. And there are certain books that were prepared by great mystics. It's called Tikkun Leil Shavuot, which has in it parts of the Zohar, parts of the Chumash, part of the Nevi'im, part of the prophets, part of the Ketubim, little parts of all the, let's say, like little slices of different parts of Torah, revealed Torah and the esoteric parts of Torah. And it's like almost a handbook to touch a little bit of every part of Torah. And it is to like kind of get immersed and appreciate the Torah. Another custom that we have is in certain Ashkenazi communities, they read something called Akdamut, which was written by the teacher of Rashi, who later was killed for espousing the view of the one God. And in the Sephardic communities, there's also piyutim, their poetry that's written by Shlomo ben Ibn Gabriel. So we have different types of poetry that's read. And another beautiful custom that is found in the Sephardic community, a very romantic custom, if I could say, is that they read this kind of poetry that alludes to the Jewish people and God, like a husband and wife. And what they read is, they read the ketubah. And the ketubah is written in such a way wherein God is the chatan, God is the groom, and the Jewish people are the kala. And God says, this is what I'm going to give you. I'm giving you my Torah, I'm giving you my wisdom, I'm giving you my guidance. All you have to do is just accept it and fulfill it. And so this is one of the customs that we have in the Sephardic tradition to read this ketubah. And it's a very beautiful poetry. It talks about this wonderful bride that agrees to give her life to uphold it and treasure it, and so on and so forth. So this is these are part of the different traditions that we have. Again, I mentioned the reading of the Megillah of Ruth. Another tradition that we have is that on Shavuot, specifically on the second day of Shavuot. Okay, someone asked, where can we find this ketubah? I will find it. I know that I've come across it. I've come across this, the liturgy. It is absolutely magnificent. I will look for it. I will find it. It's
but Devorah,
yes.
Devorah, this reminds me of Shir HaShirim.
Yes.
Isn't
Shir
that?
HaShirim, yes. Shir HaShirim, the love song, one of the most erotic love songs, poetry, which is really a euphemism for the love that, yes, and the Tikkun for Shavuot, yes, I will give you guys for that. it's part of a love song between us and God, so to speak.
Yeah.
And indeed, the whole notion of us and the unity of God is seen as something that brings peace into the world. Just like when a man and a woman are united in peace, there is nothing more beautiful. Like all the love songs that we have, all the imagery, even though they can have erotic overtones, and people may think that it's driven by a certain lust or a certain desire, if you strip it all away, what people really are driven by is that there's a certain really at the base of it is there is a purity in a connection between two people that are different, right? A man and a woman are very, very different. They don't think the same way. They have different makeups, but nevertheless, they find a way to unite, but not just unite in a way that is so intense and so powerful that it supersedes any kind of unity that exists in the world. And that unity sustains the world, really. So our connection to God is seen as this potential unity. In fact, it says, the Zohar says, Oraisa v'kucha brichu kulachad, that the Torah and God are one, and also the Zohar says that the Jewish people are the unifying, the unifying force. In other words, the Torah brings rather the Jewish people and God together. It's almost like the interplay. It's the method of communication, and we see Shavuot as this manifestation that God desires our interaction. You ask yourself, why did God create a world? Why do we have this world, the cosmos? Why are we these speaking beings that have such intelligence and such an ability to understand things? Where all the other creations of this world, magnificent as they are, there's, if you ever look at a video of a safari, the lions are absolutely majestic, the elephants, or the intricacies sometimes of certain insects or lizards, how they meld into the leaf. There's so much beauty in nature. There's so much power in nature. We see mountains that are just majestic, or rivers that are pristine. We live in a world that is just a jewel. It's God's garden. Why did God create us, these speaking, thinking, feeling human beings, to be here? Why do we have to use our intelligence? It's certainly not to make war. It's certainly not to hate. That is the side effect of being very smart, is that you can use it for good or you can use it for bad. But it is to recognize like the signature that lies beneath the world, and also to bring unity into the world, a unity that only we can bring, because we're so divided, because we're so different, because each of us have a different way of looking at things, because we have different personalities, we have different backgrounds, and we have different histories. If we come united, and the unity that we have is through Torah, it is the greatest accomplishment that we can bring to the world, a recognition that there's a signature here. There's a signature to this world that's called God. There's a unique fingerprint that is a DNA that is underneath everything. Now, if you look at physics, you'll see that they say that the difference between an animal, let's say, and a human being is very little, or that even the difference between a leaf and a human being is not that great. In other words, there's an imprint, there's a signature that goes through all of it. The human being uniquely, and this is what the Jewish people have been called upon to do, which is to recognize that there's a creator in the world. This is what Matan Torah is about. And it's about rising above to recognize that. And that's why some sages say that all of the Torah is really found in the first of the two commandments. I am your God, and you shall have no other gods beside me, because within that, you find everything. Because within Shabbat, or with honoring your parents, or with not stealing, or with not killing, not murdering, with not being jealous, all of that is found through that. So Shavuot really is the day that 3,333 years ago, we have this revelation that we're privy to that gives us an insight into not only to be a people that are not shackled by physicality, but are not shackled also by other things. There are many, many other shackles that can keep us down and that limit us in terms of our spiritual potential. And that is Torah. And you look at nations that struggled, overcame oppression, were liberated from slavery. And yet, hundreds of years later, there's still oppression. And beyond that, the people themselves are not free of whatever damage the slavery caused them. So for example, we find like in the United States, although the African American community was freed from slavery, afterwards there were more laws, segregation and Jim Crow laws, and so on and so forth. And even though the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964 or 65, there's still obviously there's bigotry. But one of the greatest pains, I think, that has to be resolved is that which was damaged by slavery has still not yet been rectified. There isn't yet a rectification for that because there was no Torah given. There was freedom, but no Torah. The Jewish people, without the Torah, we would be gone. Because even though it's true that every generation, one of the most painful things about the reality of Judaism is that every generation we lose so many Jews, unfortunately, because to keep Torah is very hard. To always live with a higher purpose and not to give in. It's not convenient for me now to light the holiday candles. It's not convenient to shut off my computer and stop and study Torah because it's Shavuot. It's not convenient for me to keep Shabbat. It's not convenient for me to eat kashrut. The kosher restaurants are no good. It doesn't taste so good. I can't travel. Whatever it is, these are real inconveniences that we have to overcome. These are real difficulties. And if a person is able to keep Shabbat and able to keep kashrut, because let's say they were raised with that, so it's easy for them. So there are other things. So don't talk lashon hara. So don't speak negatively. Don't give someone bad advice. The Torah has 613 mitzvot. We do well with one. We're going to have another one that we're going to know if we're honest with ourselves. This is my challenge. I have a hard time with this mitzvah. This is a difficulty for me. So we could pride ourselves. No, I'm happy with Shabbat. I do this. I go to the mikveh. Everyone has their challenge. For one, it's this. For one, it's that. For one, it's this. For one, it's that. There's no tzaddikim. There's very few. There's 36 in every generation. There's very few tzaddikim. And even when a person is more righteous, let's say, God expects more from us. If you know more, you have to do more. So the Torah is exacting. It's demanding. It's difficult. But what does it do for us? It raises us. It raises us above our primitiveness and our animal instinct to find that unity within ourselves, and that unity within ourselves and God, and that unity within the world. It is the most unifying factor, more than anything else that we have. And therefore, Torah could be taught in any language. It could be taught to really, it doesn't matter what a person's racial background is. It doesn't matter what a person's language background is. It doesn't matter what their land, their heritage is. It doesn't matter if they don't speak a word of Hebrew, which is obviously very much connected to Lashon HaKodesh, and it's great to know the language of the Jewish people. But at the end of the day, that's not what predicates a Jewishness. A person can be Jewish without living in the land of Israel, without having ever stepped foot in the land of Israel, even though the land of Israel is at the heart of our emotions, and we pray for it, and indeed, may Hashem help that there's safety and peace and security in the land of Israel, an enduring peace and enduring security, and may everyone be protected from all harm. But that being said, the Torah supersedes everything, because the Torah goes straight up to the relationship between us and our Creator. And so therefore, it's true that every generation, we will unfortunately lose a certain percentage. Sometimes there are people who come from the religious community that leave it. They're very unhappy there. And there's enough films, if you look at any genre of Jewish films, that's probably one of the greatest motifs. Look, I came from this religious community, they were horrible, and I left. This is part and parcel of reality. I know people see this, they go, oh my gosh, it's horrible. I know from my grandmother grew up in Russia in a small shtetl. She told me she grew up, she grew up at the time of the Russian Revolution. It was a very, very unstable time in life then. There was a tremendous persecution from the Tsarist government till then. People wanted freedom. They wanted the shackles off. There was, the Jews couldn't own land. They couldn't go to university. They couldn't go to schools. There was a tremendous amount of prejudice. So they wanted to throw the shackles off. A lot of them threw the shackles of Judaism together with that. My grandmother was one who stayed loyal to the faith of her fathers. Her sisters did not. Her sister did not. So this is not a new thing. It's not a new thing. It's part and parcel of our history. It's hard to hold on to the Torah, but it's the greatest gift we give ourselves. It's the greatest gift we give to our children. And to the extent that we can do it and become better at it and learn it and attach ourselves to it, it is our life source. But the Torah tells us about the Torah. Ki heim chayenu, this is our life. V'orach yameinu, and the length of our days. Ubohem nega yomim v'layla, and with this we should be attached morning and night. Now, easier said than done, but at least that's the goal. And what does Shavuos remind us? We eat cheesecake. I love cheesecake. Blin says it's wonderful. It's a dairy custom. We tap into the reasons, whether it is the milk of Moses that he drank, or whether it is because the Jewish people didn't know how to shech. We put flowers in our home to remember the gardenery of Sinai, or to remember that God is the gardener of this world, and we are his workers. And God created this world, and we are his workers. Or whether it is the ability to study Torah in depth on Shavuot, a time to focus, or whether it is to remember that King David was born and died on this day, and who was his grandmother. His grandmother was a person who came to Torah by sheer will, by hard work. And the Torah tells us that what King David had in common with his grandmother, they both did not have an easy life. They both had to fight to get where they were. They both had a life that was predicated with difficulty and sorrow. One need only open the book of Psalms. And by the way, when Israel's going through this hard time, I recommend it very, very strongly. The book of Psalms is one of the greatest sources of solace for ourselves and for the Jewish people. But the book of Psalms is full of David crying, God, my life is so hard. Help me. Help me. I know you will, but help me. And indeed, it's custom to read the book of Psalms on the second day of Shavuot in honor of David. But all this flows into one idea, which is this, that 3,333 years ago, our Jewish people experienced something as a nation, which was this idea that we can live with a higher ideal, that we don't have to give in to our animal self, that we can say, there shall be no God over us. There should be no Lord, except for the one God, the God that cannot be seen, the invisible energy that is the manifestation of everything that is in this earth. And without him, it doesn't exist. And the Torah tells us, by the way, that in Jewish, it says that God, that God is always renewing the world. So in Hasidic teaching understands this as that if God does not will the world into creation every single minute, it will dissolve. And if you look at physics, you see that there's the atoms, and if you break down any physical thing in creation, it comes back to the same unique kind of signature. And there's an energy that agitates around it. They don't understand what that energy is. That energy stops, everything collapses. So this is born out in physics, but the idea that there is a God, and I think one of the most important things, because we could take pleasure in learning the Torah. And indeed, there's a lot of pleasure in learning Torah, because Torah is such an intellectual pursuit. But the most important thing, as we go into Shavuot, if I could sum it up in three things. Number one is, let's focus on that unity. Shavuot is about what unites us. Number two, let's be grateful for this amazing reality that we have a higher calling, and that this reality sustains us. And number three, when we go into Shavuot, and if we're going to study Torah, and if we're going to learn Torah, we have to remember that we cannot divorce the Torah, the pleasure of learning, the intellectual pursuit of Torah, with the giver of the Torah. The giver of the Torah is God. Torah can never become divorced of that. If we divorce Torah of that, we have relegated Torah to just another science. And that's missing the whole point. So I want to wish everyone a very happy Shavuot. Candle lighting today is 8:01. If you don't light candles every week, make sure to light it this week. The world needs the light. I want to again thank you, Yvonne, for the wonderful contribution. May the memory of your father bring you a lot of joy. May the Torah and the inspiration be forever a blessing to Yosef ben Alexander. And may we each and every one of us go into this Shavuot with joy and happiness. May the news from Israel become good news for all of us. And may we bring both our joy in our appreciation of what it is that we're receiving this Shavuot, and also may we go into Shavuot with meaning and purpose and thoughtfulness and mindfulness. And this way, whatever we're going to put into Shavuot is something that is going to, in turn, vivify us and give us meaning, not only in the weeks to come, but into the next year to come till the next Shavuot. So Chag Sameach, everybody. If somebody wants to have links for the ketubah that I mentioned about the Sephardic tradition of reading this beautiful ketubah, I will email me, and I will email it to you, as well as the Tikkun Leil Shavuot, which is also available online. One of the great blessings that we have, curses and blessings, it's a tool, but one of the great blessings that we have is that the Torah is so available to us today in a way that has never ever been available to us. In the past, we would have to go to a library and ask someone, do you know where I can get a copy of this? And today we can go online and we can find it at our fingertips. And it really is a fulfillment of the prophecy that there will be a time that the knowledge and the knowledge of God will fill the earth like the ocean fills the seabed. So may that increase, and may this Shavuot be the harbinger of peace in Israel. May this Shavuot be the harbinger of peace in ourselves, within ourselves, harmony within ourselves, harmony within our homes, harmony within the Jewish people, and harmony with the world. And may the whole world recognize the gift of this one Creator that unites us, and that when we look at it, we're all there. We can all be there in unison, in harmony, represented by the beautiful number 3 that is so the theme of this week's Shavuot. So Chag Sameach, everybody. Happy Shavuot, and be in touch, and easy preparations. And don't forget to light the Shabbat candles. Chag Sameach.
Thank you. Devorah,
Yes.
if you know what, I was talking to my family in Israel, and I missed the most part of the shur, but I see it recording.
I am going to put it on YouTube. I'll put it on YouTube or Facebook. I'll try to do it. Usually I'm very bad at that. Once I record it, it goes into like this kind of file, and I know I should record it, but then I'm very bad at actually uploading it. But I will, because if somebody wants to hear it again, as you're preparing, it'll be my pleasure.
I'm really enjoying it.
I will do that.
Yeah,
so you know where you can go. I will put it on YouTube. How will I let you know about it?
I'll send you my email. I'm not maybe
send me your email. I'll give you a link. With pleasure.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Chag Sameach, easy preparations.
Chag Sameach.
And we all bring the
Devorah?
Yes.
First of all, it was just amazing. I'm going to watch it again. Absolutely. I have just a little quick question.
Sure.
Just wondering, you said that we read the Tehillim.
Yes.
Actually, I was born on Shavuot's first day.
Oh, happy birthday. Wow.
So, B'ezrat
what a
Hashem,
privilege.
bless all of Kol Yisrael. But I was wondering, the Psalms of David, why would we do it on the second day if his yard site is the first?
His yard site is the second day. Second day of Shavuot. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Thank you so much, because I wanted to read it. That's why I made
Okay, and I'm gonna look up that ketubah and also the Tikkun Leil Shavuot.
Thank you so much.
Yes, pleasure,
Beautiful.
everyone.
Thank
Chag
you.
Sameach, and it should be truly a Chag Sameach.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.